And for those who don't know how the Pentagon is constructed, I'm going to have to compete with the helicopter, one of the rescue helicopters that's taking off right now. But the Pentagon is constructed in 5 separate rings. What you see out here is the most outer ring, or the E ring. The plane impacted with such a force that it actually penetrated deep into the building into 3 separate rings. First the E ring, then through an open space, the D ring, another open space, and finally into the C ring. The actual plane, when it went into the building, punched a gaping hole in the first 2 floors. The upper floors were still intact, but in the ensuing fire, they eventually collapsed on themselves, and actually burying any additional hopes that additional survivors could be found alive. It took 4 hours for Arlington, Virginia firefighters to bring the blaze under control, to allow rescuers to get anywhere close to the devastated area to search for additional survivors. You see behind me now, lined up is a lot of search and rescue and recovery equipment, huge cranes. In those buses were some rescue teams from various emergency agencies from around the area. They donned their backpacks, emergency oxygen bottles, and headed for the building and the devastation you see behind us. There are many confirmed dead, scores confirmed injured, but the Pentagon does not yet have an actual casualty count. It could be hours, maybe even days before they finally get that. Katie?
Mick, I understand that the U.S. military, as you well know, is on a state of high alert. Explain to people what exactly that means.
Okay, Katie, I think you were asking about the state of alert. Here at the Pentagon, it immediately went to the highest state of alert, Delta. And we're told now that all American forces around the world have been put at the absolute highest state of alert, which is actually a virtual state of war. They are manning weapons that are loaded. They are fully protected in whatever, in their helmets and their flak vests, preparing for the absolute worst. And throughout the day, this was kind of an eerie sight too. Throughout the day, we saw U.S. Air Force F-16 flying low cover over the city. And as one Air Force officer was standing by me looking up, said, "My God, we're now flying cover over the nation's capital."
We've heard actually those very same planes, or what appears to appear to be military planes, flying over Manhattan as well, Mick. Now, we understand that the flight that crashed near Pittsburgh was actually targeting Camp David. Is that your understanding?
That's what we're hearing from Pentagon officials, but no confirmation of that. And I must put a rumor to rest. There were rumors that an Air Force F-16 actually shot down that jet. Pentagon officials have said categorically that is not the case. There may have been an explosion aboard that jet before it crashed, but there was no U.S. Air Force plane involved in shooting down that airliner, which, as you say, appeared to have been headed for Camp David, perhaps out of Pittsburgh.
All right, Jim Miklaszewski. Jim, thank you very much under very difficult circumstances. Thank you, Mick.
All right. They can really assess what's going to happen with that building.
And Bob Jameson, who we talked to, who gave us first early warning of this some time ago, wasn't sure exactly how tall that building was. Number 7 World Trade Center is 47 stories tall. And I assume, maybe you know, but listen first of all. Again, you hear the sounds. I apologize. I thought it was something new coming. John, I assume that the 7, the World Trade Center, has been evacuated?
Yes, it's been evacuated, and they're just trying to assess what they can do to it to ensure its structural stability before they send people in to go through the rubble and look for survivors.
And do they believe this was made structurally unsound by the concussion of the Twin Towers falling?
Yes, and literally by the fact that so much of one of the Twin Towers fell on top of the building. In fact, as Jerry Howard told us earlier, people couldn't get in or get out of the entrances because it was buried in the rubble of the Twin Towers, most of the ground floor of it. They've been able to get people out, but they don't know that the building is safe.
Do your police and fire department contacts believe that under the rubble here of the North Tower, which collapsed, which we have seen, which we're looking at this moment, do they believe that there's survivors under there?
They are certainly holding out the possibility and the hope, especially since so many of them are police and fire personnel. There's a real difficulty for them right now because their instinct is to run in and save their people, and perhaps cooler heads in the emergency management have said we can't afford to lose any more people if another building goes. So they're terribly torn between their instincts to rescue the civilians and their own colleagues, and the numbers of unaccounted for among the police and fire as they do their spot roll calls to relocate everybody who responded are growing.
Stay with me for just a second, because I want to talk very briefly who's on the telephone. Gary Breeze, who's the head of the International Association of Firefighters, who will have been in contact with the fire departments here in New York City. Do you hear me, Mr. Breeze?
I can hear you, thank you.
I know exactly what your sentiments are today, and I think John Miller has made it very clear. Everybody runs and your people go in. But in your contacts today, we've been working with the notion that a couple of hundred firefighters may be missing. Do you know anything about this?
We still have several hundred firefighters unaccounted for. Fire Department of New York, when they send an initial assignment to the World Trade Center, it involves about 125 firefighters on the initial assignment. And without a doubt, when they realize the severity of the situation, they dispatch greater alarms, and probably had between about 300 firefighters on the scene before the first collapse occurred. The issue here is now the criticality of the next 24 to 36 hours. We're moving from the initial impact of this incident to the rescue and recovery phases. And one of the challenges, as Jerry Hauer was saying, is that the desire for rescue. We find statistically that about 90% of the people that are rescued from building collapses are rescued in the first 24 hours. So this next time period will be very critical for the rescue of injured people.
Now, Mr. Priest, as you have talked to your colleagues in New York, though, where are you, by the way?
I happen to be in Denver today.
Right. As you've talked to your colleagues in New York, do you get any sense from them about whether what you describe as rescue and recovery is going to be more recovery than rescue?
I think it's going to be both. The World Trade Center is a horrific disaster. The primary rescue efforts will be taking place in the buildings that surround the World Trade Center. We have some 8 urban search and rescue teams on the way there now, but they will take at least 24 hours to become operational.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
The president from earlier today at Barksdale Air Force Base in northwest Louisiana. He was then taken to Omaha, Nebraska, and now is on his way back to Washington tonight. He is expected to address the nation. We don't know from where, and we don't know what time, but we hope to bring it to you live when we do. And there is the flag at the United States Capitol, a live picture at half-staff this afternoon. Our phone lines are open as we're taking your phone calls. And
an hour ago, it looked to be something on the order of 50, 60 stories, as you said, a very, very large office building. And I don't know whether they were able to evacuate all of the emergency personnel before the collapse, but I can tell you that an hour ago, there were a number of firefighters and police officers in the area. They were watching building number 7 burn because there was frankly nothing they could do about it. The inferno was huge. So much of the building was collapsing into the street bit by bit that they were unable to do anything with it. And now it seems that building number 7 has finally collapsed, at least the third building to fall in the World Trade Center today.
Scott Pelley in Lower Manhattan. I don't believe Scott Pelley hears me, but Scott, on the off chance you do we know anything about trade?
At least where building number 7 is concerned, a building that, among other things, housed this emergency response team of the city of New York. At least they had some warning. They had signs that this might happen, and they were able to get as many people away from the area. And the people in the area, of course, are firefighters, EMS personnel, and literally thousands of police officers who have cordoned off the area.
We don't know what the condition of building number 5 is at this moment.
Scott Pelley, and we're told Associated Press quotes authorities as saying that building 7, the one you just saw collapse on videotape there, and this has happened within the last few minutes, that we're told that the building had been evacuated. Sir, you know the World Trade Center complex. What was building 7? Do you know?
It was the Solomon Smith Barney.
Solomon Smith Barney. Say again.
It was built for Solomon Smith Barney.
So Solomon Brothers and Smith Barney were in that building, headquartered there. Yes. But I want to emphasize that we're told that the building had been evacuated because it was in danger of collapsing in some time.
I don't know.
And in building 5, which is reported on...
This is Morgan Stanley building as well.
And you work in Morgan Stanley again?
Building 5 is the operation for Morgan
Thank you very much. And we get back to the point which...
9:08 this morning. Ben Wiedemann, who normally reports for us, I'm sorry, we'll get to that. Let's go back to Washington and CNN's Judy Woodruff. Judy?
Aaron, again, pictures that have everyone here riveted. We're told, I don't know whether we have this picture right now available to show our viewers, but I'm told that just a short time ago, driving up Massachusetts Avenue, which is one of the main thoroughfares here in the nation's capital, goes all the way from the Capitol out to northwest Washington, beyond the Naval Observatory where the Vice President lives, and beyond on out into the Maryland suburbs. There was observed a convoy of military vehicles, Humvees, military vehicles, driving up slowly, patrolling, appearing to patrol the area, going out away from the Capitol toward northwest, toward Maryland. Now, perhaps this is just a patrolling effort, but the sight of it has to be something to cause comment, because normally at this hour in Washington you would see an enormous amount of just rush hour traffic, but today is not like any other day. Now to our own senior White House correspondent, John King, who's just about a block and a half from the White House on top of an office building up above the 10th floor there. John?
Judy, a few quick bits of information. As we have been reporting, the president is on his way back to Washington, and we can now say definitively that when he arrives in Washington, he will address the American people tonight. I am told by sources plans are for an address from the White House. The target time, 9 p.m. That could be moved up a little, but 8 or 9 p.m. we are now told is the target time. But for now, the administration will not confirm that the address will be broadcast from the White House. There have been security concerns throughout the day. We see now on the grounds of the White House, which was evacuated hours ago, some bomb-sniffing dogs and other security personnel securing the area around the White House. But we are told by administration officials the president will be back in Washington shortly and will address the American people tonight. And as we reported a bit earlier, congressional leaders who also, as part of the protocol, the emergency evacuation protocol, were taken to a secure locations themselves outside of Washington. The bipartisan congressional leadership also making its way back to Washington, and it will deliver statements, the 4 leaders from the steps of the Capitol tonight as well. All of these designed to offer signs of reassurances to the American people that their government is up and running at this time of great tragedy. I want to add one other bit of information. A lot of lawmakers trying to get briefings from Capitol Hill police, from administration officials, from the CIA and the FBI and others. We are told that in those briefings there has been some speculation, and again the law enforcement officials saying this is just speculation at this moment, that that plane that crashed outside of Pittsburgh may have been heading toward Washington. In those briefings, I'm told by several sources, 3 potential targets were listed. 1, the presidential retreat at Camp David. 2, the White House. And 3, the United States Capitol building. Again, though, lawmakers and other officials being given those briefings told that is speculative, but based on the flight paths and everything else we've seen unfold on this tragic day, that law enforcement officials believe at this moment that the potential targets for that plane, which crashed outside Pittsburgh, were perhaps Camp David, perhaps the White House behind me, or perhaps the United States Capitol. Judy?
John, and we can only imagine the struggle that must have gone on board that aircraft in the cockpit or wherever in order to keep the plane from going where the people who wanted to bring it to Washington, they were obviously prevented from reaching their target. Air travel throughout the United States, domestic air travel, has been shut down today since these terrible accident incidents in New York City and here in Washington. In fact, there's no air travel until at least noon tomorrow on order of the Federal Aviation Administration. But right now we want to go to one of the airports in the Washington area, that is Dulles International. This is the site of where the American Airlines flight 77 that left this morning on its way to Los Angeles and ended up plowing into the Pentagon a very short time later. CNN's Eileen O'Connor is there at Dulles. Eileen?
Well, there has been some activity here, Judy. The FBI has arrived, and they have been seen going in and out of the building. They brought some equipment in to check through the building. We do know from airport personnel and the airport authority that both National and Dulles are shut down till 11 o'clock at least tomorrow morning, but also that they immediately implemented an emergency drill procedure. And that means that they called in all of their police, and they have their own police force and their own fire personnel, and they also have all of their operational staff here at the airport. They are securing the airport. You can see actually behind me, they have actually erected barricades, concrete barricades, with some of these forklifts. Have been operating over the last hour, erecting these barricades. Also, there's barricades right now in the entrances to the airport to prevent anyone from coming back here. As you also said, United and American Airlines, obviously they are the ones that lost flights. They have been issuing statements saying that they are trying to help the families, both of these airlines issuing statements. They've also said that they have accounted for all of their other flights and that they are all safely on the ground. They want to make sure people know that. And they also say that they will do everything they can to make sure that their customers, the people who were traveling, are comfortable until they can fly on to their destinations. Judy?
And Eileen, any other people around there? I mean, we see you, obviously, and we see a few other people, but presumably not much other activity there at all.
No, and they have actually tried to stage some of the, obviously there are relatives, concerned relatives from the American flight that took off from this morning, and we are being told by airport authorities that they are trying to send those relatives over to a nearby hotel and to try to give them information. Both airlines have issued phone numbers for the
People train air crews from all over the world, our people meaning in the United States. We wouldn't necessarily have any clue of what was in their hearts or what they were planning to do if they came in the door from a legitimate carrier or even a private operator of a 757, because there are some private ones out there.
Thank you, John. Is there anything else you need to add? Please go ahead.
Yeah, just one other thing. This is an unusual situation, and one of the little flags in this, Peter, at this early stage is the fact that we're talking about only 757s and 767s. That is the only combination of big airplanes that have what we call a common type rating. In other words, if you're rated in one, you can fly the other. The cockpits are almost identical. And that may be of no consequence here. It may have simply been coincidental, but it also raises a little flag that maybe we are dealing with somebody who planned this on the basis of having trained for this type of airplane.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much indeed, which certainly speaks to the point that any number of analysts of terrorism, somebody said this morning, nobody wants to be described as an expert on terrorism today, as analysts of terrorism and terrorism activity, and who try to monitor it around the world as effectively as they can, have said this was today a very sophisticated operation. We do know now, we believe, that about 100 people are believed to have been killed or injured in today's attack on the Pentagon. And as John McWethy from the Pentagon has said to us on several occasions, there is no guarantee that that is the final number. But currently, the information from the Pentagon is that 100 people are believed to have been killed or injured in today's attack. And you recall that Mayor Giuliani of New York, the closest he has come to giving casualty figures, which he's very understandably reluctant to do, that 2,100 people were injured, 600 taken to hospital, 1,500 walking wounded taken to Liberty State Park, which is on the other side of the Hudson River, actually in New Jersey, where the Statue of Liberty, all this in full view of the Statue of Liberty, and that various hospitals from New York City all the way to Canada are treating people today who have been somehow injured in this. Now, I want to talk to Lynn Scher, who has been following the aircraft all day. That is the American and United Airlines planes involved in these incidents. Lynn?
As you well know, the only video that we've seen of an actual crash was of that second flight. That was the United flight that crashed into the second World Trade Tower. What we're going to show you now is some very crude animation of the first flight. That was American Airlines 11. That's the flight from Boston to Los Angeles that went into the first World Trade Tower. What this is animation based on the track of the plane, data coming from the FAA. You're going to hear Walter Cross, the programmer, describing it.
The flight took an immediate hard left turn due south. The speed initially decreased by over 100 miles an hour and then increased to over 500. And then as it approached the New York area, it slowed to all the way down to about 300 knots. So, and then tragically it impacted in the World Trade Center. American 11 was indeed the first flight. We have confirmed that of the two.
And that, again, that was the voice of Walter Cross, the programmer, who put that animation together. What that shows you is this flight on its way to Los Angeles headed due west and then made that very sharp turn. Mr. Cross also told us that there was an indication of some air violence right before that left-hand turn, violent changes in airspeed as the plane went off track to head into the World Trade Towers. On that flight, 92 people, not counting the hijacker. And Peter, I've done some very quick calculations. Of course, all of the planes involved in today's incidents were headed to California. 3 of them to Los Angeles, 1 to San Francisco, 2 had left Boston, 1 from Dulles, 1 from Newark Airport. Total number of passengers and crew, 266 people, not, of course, counting the hijackers. Peter?
Thanks very much, Lynn. And the issue of taking off from Boston and Dulles and all headed for California, John Miller raised the issue before of whether or not, there are lots of reasons, and again we'd be speculating, but he makes the point that aircraft taking off from Boston and Dulles outside Washington to go to California would have full loads of fuel on them, thereby creating a far greater explosive potential without having had to have explosives on board and getting them past U.S. security either at Dulles Airport or at Boston. 266 people on the aircraft alone today who have died in this attack on the United States and on the American people. Now, in our control room, somebody says there is a... Let me go first to Bill Blakemore and then perhaps to Joe Torres of WABC, our affiliate in New York. Bill Blakemore, you there? And I gather you saw number 7 come down.
Yes, I did, Peter. I'm standing right on the West Side Highway. The skyline of the financial district has changed again. Just a few minutes ago, I was talking to some people. I was facing north. I saw shock in their face, heard screams, spun around, and then we just watched the building fall in on itself. I believe we have a little bit of tape here. That's, Peter, it was an astonishing thing because the civilians who were standing around here were all amazed, but things have become so bizarre down here that the hundreds of firemen who were standing around looked at it, felt a bit shocked, but then just said, well, we're going to have even more work to do. Associate producer Lucy Kerrigan had been over near that building just a little bit earlier, and the policeman had told her that they feared the building was going to come down, that they were evacuating people from around it. So that's one little bit of good news, is that there may have been fewer casualties from this latest collapse than there otherwise might have been because they knew of the potential. But it's now still a very hot day here. The search and rescue operation is mounting even larger. There are dozens and dozens of fire trucks backed up on the West Side Highway, police trucks. There are what look like hundreds of volunteers who have showed up, who have been marshaled by the Red Cross, all with masks to avoid breathing in dust, but nobody can go in yet. We're still looking at buildings that are on fire down in the center of the financial district, and it's clearly a great deal of devastation. It's not too strong a word at all. It's going to take a while even to assess how bad it is.
Bill, do you have any idea whether or not other buildings in the immediate area are vulnerable at the moment, whether there's concern about any other building as there was about this additional one after the towers?
Well, from the angle I'm looking at, we can see one other building still on fire, and it seems to be on fire through the length of it. I would estimate that's like about a 30 or 40 story building. The problem for any one of us, of course, is that because of the other buildings down here still standing, which are so tall, you can't get a very clean view of the whole thing from the ground. But there's at least one, and it's clearly going to go on into the night. There's a lot of black smoke pouring out of that building now.
Thank you, Bill. Just we just stay with this photograph or this graphic for just a second. Well, no, there's number 7 coming down. When you think that part of the component of news coverage around the country every year is the excitement and the fun that people get watching an old building being demolished, and they wire it very carefully for days, and it's a very careful operation in order to make sure that a building comes down safely. I think the last one we saw was when they brought down one of the old casinos in Las Vegas. I mean, this is just stunning to see these things come down inside. In the case of the north and south towers there of the World Trade Center, come down within a couple of hours as a result of the structural damage, weakening that was done when these aircraft hit them. And now number 7, the World Trade Center, which is
where they were. We feel your pain. I know for an hour I couldn't find my daughter, whose high school is in the shadow of the World Trade Center, and praise God I was able to find her, and she and my wife, who works downtown in New York, and my other daughter are safe. So our first feeling is for the families and the suffering and the pain that goes on in New York and throughout the country. I spoke on behalf of us to the President this afternoon. He wished me to convey to New Yorkers that he will do everything possible to help the rescue and the recovery, and what needs to be done in future years and months, because this loss is just a terrible loss that will not go away soon. He also expressed a second point, which we share, and that is that those who did this must be brought to justice. For too long, the world has just shrugged its shoulders at terrorism. But we now know that none of us as Americans can avoid that terrorism unless we take strong action against it. And I express to the President on behalf of both of us and all of the Senate that we stand shoulder to shoulder with him in this fight, that no one will try to seek partisan or geographic or any other advantage. We will be united in this fight, and we will do everything we can. We cannot have a month-long or a year-long fight against terrorism. We have to have a permanent fight against terrorism, because this is the new form of warfare. And so, the few things we ask people: first, for prayers. Second, anyone in America who can, through their local authorities, give blood. We are desperately short of blood. We need doctors who can contact the authorities if they live within a days of New York. We are short of doctors. And of course, FEMA and the urban rescue teams, as many as our nation has, are being sent immediately. America can never turn back from this point. And we are in a new era where we realize the world is an interconnected but sometimes very nasty place. We have to be prepared for it. And so, two things. One, love and caring for those who accepted loss, and help for those who need some path to recovery. And second, resoluteness, that we will never let this happen again, and do everything we can, and some of the steps won't be easy, to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Well, Chuck and I wish we could be in New York, but that's not possible. And we've been in constant communication with the authorities, with the White House, the governor's office, the mayor's office, with the emergency officials. And I think that it's clear to everyone this was an attack on America. It may have been directed at New York, but it really is attacking everything we stand for in every part of our country. And I'm very proud of the way New Yorkers responded. The behavior of the people on the ground, the emergency resources, our police and firefighters have just been extraordinary, and many of them were put in harm's way because they were doing their job. Our medical facilities, all the hospitals in the immediate area, are overwhelmed. We are moving non-critical patients out of hospitals in the city, out to Long Island, even Westchester, in order to make room for those who have been injured. We do need more blood. We need doctors and nurses and other medical professionals who would be able to support those who are working so tirelessly. We appreciate the federal resources, certainly the search and rescue teams, the National Guard, FEMA. We've been assured we will have everything we need to conduct the various phases of the reaction. First, of course, is to find any who might have survived. Second is to find every body of anyone who has not, to do the hard work of sifting for evidence, and then for the task of rebuilding. This will be a monumental undertaking. This was a nerve center of communications, of infrastructure that affects not just our nation, but the entire world in terms of the access to and transfer of information. We're also deeply concerned about the attack on the Pentagon. We just had a conference call with our Senate leadership, bipartisan, Senators Daschle and Reid and Lott and Nichols. We also heard from Senator Warner. He and Senator Levin are at the Pentagon, where they have gone to do everything they can to support what needs to be done, and they were certainly very confident that our military forces are as alert and ready as they need to be. So there is An enormous amount of very good, solid work being done in New York, in Washington, throughout the country. I would just reiterate, there is absolutely no need for anyone anywhere to panic. This has been carried out in an orderly and effective manner, but we have a lot of work ahead of us, and that work includes the identifying of those who are responsible for this cowardly and evil act and holding them accountable wherever they might be, however long it would take.
Do authorities have any idea who is responsible for these attacks?
I think they do, and they're not prepared to say yet, but I have spoken to both FBI and CIA today, and they are certainly not clueless.
We step away from Senators Schumer and Clinton to give you some new information. We are expecting a number of briefings very shortly. One from the mayor of New York City. Also, in about 15 minutes from now, the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, is due to brief in Washington. Shortly before 7 p.m. Eastern Time, the Attorney General, John Ashcroft, and possibly other members of the cabinet will also brief. They will be at the FBI building in Washington, D.C. With that, we want to let you know what is happening in New York City. The National Guard has been called out to Lower Manhattan trying to help with the rescue. It appears that hundreds of police and firefighters are missing from the ranks of those who were sent in to respond to the first crash. We go now to correspondent David Lee Miller, who is near one of the buildings that has just collapsed. David?
Linda, we're on Church Street, and this really is ground zero, only a few blocks away from what was once the World Trade Center. The attack began a little over 9 hours ago, and just a few minutes ago, we saw further proof of its devastation. We have some incredible videotape that we should be taking a look at right now. This is number 7 World Trade Center, and as you can see, this building that authorities feared throughout the day might collapse did so just a few minutes ago. It fell in the opposite direction of the World Trade Center. It fell in a southerly direction, and when it did, a huge plume of black smoke went up. Authorities anticipated that. We were warned it might happen. They gave us special masks to wear. They were wearing these special face masks, but as the plume of smoke began to grow larger and in our direction, they asked us to relocate, and authorities moved us up north about a block and a half, and now what was once building number 7 is also gone. The New York City skyline dramatically changed in just now the last few hours. Now, as for how many people may have died, we still do not have anywhere near an estimate. We do know, according to the mayor of New York, 200 people critically injured, 600 now in the hospital. Countless victims still trapped in the rubble. Authorities having a very difficult time getting to them. It is believed that it could take now up to 1 week before authorities really get an accurate measure of how many people died in this tragedy. As proof of the panic, if you go downtown here on Church Street in front of what was once the World Trade Center, you can see that women's shoes, high-heeled shoes, litter the street. People in a panic, desperate to flee, abandoned their shoes and just ran away from the devastation as quickly as they could. For a while, even the mayor of New York, Mayor Giuliani, was trapped in a nearby building for 10 minutes on 75 Barclay Street when the two buildings collapsed, when he was here to inspect the damage. Now, at this hour, we have seen emergency crews arrive. I saw just a parade of all types of emergency vehicles. The National Guard is here. And Linda and John, one of the National Guardsmen, made a very interesting point that up until now, I certainly did not realize today's date. He said 9/11. Back to you.
David, the video we were watching just moments ago is hundreds and hundreds of people running as fast as they could run. Does that give anybody hope that a lot more people than we now think made it out alive?
I don't think so, John. I think that's certainly very dramatic tape, and I think it shows that there was a lot of panic, but I have reason to believe that a great many firemen and policemen are trapped in that rubble. They arrived at the building to try and help people who were inside, and when the buildings collapsed, it is believed a great number of New York's finest and bravest died at the scene. I can tell you because I was here this morning a few minutes after 9 o'clock, and when the buildings began to collapse, it was a very dramatic scene here on the streets. The white cloud of smoke that spread in my direction caused myself and the police to run as fast as we could in the opposite direction. But at the end of the day, I think we only now just getting a small glimpse of the extent of the damage. Back to you.
It says terror,
just destroy World Trade Center.
And then 9 o'clock tonight, President Bush. We have gotten confirmation now that President Bush is going to go on national television tonight to address the nation about this tragedy. Now, you've been keeping up with the school situation a little bit more. Let's take a look at what the young folks have tomorrow.
All right, so here is the very latest. This has changed throughout the day, but right now the information we have is this, that public schools in New York will be open tomorrow, except for the New York Archdiocese. Their schools are going to be closed. The New York Archdiocese, until further notice, I assume, but definitely closed tomorrow.
What can you tell us out there?
Well, Joey, it's about 2:30 in the morning here in Kabul. We can hear explosions around the perimeter of the city. We're in a position here which gives us a view over the whole city. We just heard an impact perhaps a few miles away. If I listen, you can hear the ripple of explosions around the city. Perhaps we've heard there the sixth explosion. I see gunbursts and starbursts in the air. Tracer fire is coming up out of the city. I hear aircraft flying above the city of Kabul. Perhaps we've heard half a dozen to 10 detonations on the perimeter of the city, some coming from the area close to the airport. I see on the horizon what could be a fire on the horizon, close perhaps to where the airport might be. A flash came up then from the airport. Some ground fire coming up here in Kabul. A lot of flashing, reflecting off clouds towards the horizon here. We thought that might have been a thunderstorm before. The detonations we're hearing now much louder than a thunderstorm. Also detonations very similar to those caused by large missiles. I've been in Belgrade and I've been in Baghdad and seen cruise missiles arrive in both those cities. The detonations we're hearing in Kabul right now certainly sound like the detonations of loud missiles that are coming in. We do see tracer fire going up into the air and hear the detonations towards the perimeter of the city, heavy air detonations we can hear now. It's what sounds like a lot of anti-aircraft fire going up, multiple detonations we can hear in the air. I'll try and be quiet for a moment, see if we can pick up some of those sounds coming in from the perimeter of the city, Joey. Very quiet at this particular moment. The city still tracer fire, rockets going up around the airport, tracer fire flying across the city in the direction of the airport. The city at this stage still very well illuminated. The electricity supply is still on in the city, illuminating the city. Detonation coming in from towards the airport. Multiple detonations now going off again towards the perimeter of the city in the direction of the airport. We see one fire on the horizon at this moment. Kabul is surrounded by mountains. The detonations reverberate from those mountains, so it's difficult to get an accurate fix on exactly where the impacts are happening. Certainly, it would appear that the Afghan defense systems have detected a threat in the air. They are launching what appears to be anti-aircraft defense systems at the moment. Certainly I can see that fire that was blazing on the horizon. It was a faint yellow. It's now a bright orange blazing. Several other detonations going off around the city, multiple areas. Rockets appear to be taking off from one end of the airport. I can see that's perhaps located about 8 or 9 miles away from where we stand, Joey.
We want to ask you to please keep your line up to us. We're having difficulty reaching you on another line, but please keep your line up. We can see the pictures coming to us by the video phone. Again, this is very advanced technology that CNN is using, but you will see some of the digital effect. It is not quite as clear as your average television signal, and so to our viewers, we apologize for that. But this is certainly the only video that you're going to get from Kabul, Afghanistan at this point, and you're watching it on CNN. Again, we are hearing from our correspondent, Nick Robertson, who's on the scene in Kabul with his team there, and he has reported the sounds of tracer fire. He has reported the fire burning there in Kabul. the seat of Afghanistan's power and the seat of its Taliban government. Again, we are watching their picture coming to us on the video phone, and it is very hard, of course, to see exactly what you're looking at. But you are looking at Kabul. Again, you see some tracer fire there coming across the scene. Nick Robertson, can you hear us?
We're being told, Joey, I can hear you if you can hear me. Certainly, big detonation there, missiles flying across the city. We're being told from sources in Kandahar, that's the spiritual capital of Afghanistan, 300 miles south of here, that there is no rocket activity like this south of here in Kandahar. Certainly in Kabul, very, very active at this stage. Multiple detonations. It is nighttime here. It is dark. It is difficult to get an accurate fix on exactly what we're seeing and exactly what we're hearing. Certainly the sound, what appears to be the sound of large missiles incoming and landing in the city. Certainly a big fire on the horizon of the city at the moment. And certainly anti-aircraft fire coming up from the city and rockets being launched and flying across the horizon of the city. Rockets perhaps going at the speed of several hundred miles an hour, the sort of speed that one might expect to see cruise missiles traveling across the horizon at, burning with a white glow coming from their tails rather than a yellow glow. The fire on the horizon that we can see from here burning furiously now. Perhaps it would be accurate at this stage to suspect that that was a fuel dump that's been hit by the way that it's burning, flames leaping, and that fuel dump must be perhaps 5 to 8 miles from where I am. Flames leaping up from that fuel dump now leaping up right into the air. It was a low-burning fire before, but it's now really increased in its ferocity, perhaps indicating that it is a fuel dump. Looking across the rest of the city, that fuel dump, perhaps the only big fire we can see at this time. From our vantage point here at the Kabul Intercontinental Hotel that overlooks the whole of the city of Kabul, that is in a basin surrounded by mountains, the whole city is laid out in front of us. The gunfire that was coming up from the city seems to have subsided for now. We're not hearing any more detonations at this moment. And as I say, the fire on the horizon really burning furiously at this time, flames leaping way up in the air this moment. Joey?
Nick, if you can talk to us a little bit about your circumstance. It is 6 o'clock in the evening here in Atlanta. It must be quite late at night there in Kabul.
Indeed, 2:30 in the morning here, Joey. We're eight and a half hours ahead of East Coast time in the United States. And it was about 5 hours ago that the foreign minister of Afghanistan, Wakil Ahmed Mutawakil, briefed journalists. I hear more detonations going off now. He said that the Taliban had not taken precautions against the possibility of there being an air attack against Afghanistan. He said because it was not necessary. The Taliban spiritual leader, Mullah Omar, had also made a statement saying that they felt Osama bin Laden wasn't responsible for what had happened in the United States. He said his country was a peaceful country. He wanted it to be at peace, and he wanted peace in other countries around the world. Certainly what we're seeing in Kabul these early hours of this Wednesday morning is very far from peace. Certainly multiple explosions happening in and around the city. There is a front line about 50 miles north of the city where the Taliban are fighting a battle against the Northern Alliance here. We could hear detonations coming from that northern area as well. But on the perimeter of the city, particularly in the direction of the Kabul airport, which is about 5 to 8 miles from where we are, detonations coming from there. I remember standing on this balcony about 4 years ago watching fighter jets bomb that airport as part of Afghanistan's ongoing civil war. The flash at the airport to us hearing the detonation at the hotel is about the same duration. So I am using that as an estimate to gauge that those missiles again are falling in the area of the airport. First, we're seeing the flash, and then we hear the detonation some several seconds afterwards, and they appear to be coming from that airport area, in some cases several miles away from us. There are still a lot of flashing we can see in the air reflected off clouds. That could be thunder and lightning. However, there's a possibility that those reflections are missiles landing elsewhere, the flashes as they explode and reflecting off the clouds. But it's not a good indication. We certainly don't hear any detonations coming from that particular direction at this time. The anti-aircraft fire that we were seeing a little while ago is not coming up from the city. The city, apart from the detonations we were hearing a few minutes ago, appears very, very calm. The visibility here is excellent. We can see all the way across the city. It lies on a plain that's surrounded by the mountains here in Kabul. We have high mountains to the right. These mountains were used by the Mujahideen as vantage points for shelling the city several years ago during the Mujahideen infighting in Kabul. The last 5 years, the Taliban have been in control of this city, have been trying to extend their control over and across Afghanistan. And the Foreign Minister this evening telling journalists and CNN that he didn't believe that Afghanistan would be attacked. He said if Afghanistan was attacked, then they would call it, the Taliban would call it an act of state-sponsored terrorism, Joey.
All right, that is CNN's Nick Robertson. Again, please keep the line open to us. Nick Robertson there in Kabul, Afghanistan. For our viewers who are watching this with us on the air, again, we're getting this from video phone technology. You're seeing this exclusively on CNN. It is a very new technology, and so you could tell from the audio line it is not as clear as our typical TV feed, and the visuals obviously are not as clear, but you are looking at the city of Kabul in Afghanistan. This is the seat of the Taliban government there, not its spiritual center, but its government center in any case. You are seeing in just about the last 10 minutes, we have been hearing these reports from CNN correspondent Nick Robertson on the ground in Kabul of an explosion. You see on the right side of your screen about a third of the way over, the flames of fire. They were quite large just a short time ago, seem to have simmered down, but again, we're just not seeing very much of this because it's the video phone. Again, Nick Robertson saying that they had seen tracers going up as well. They have been listening and hearing the possibility of additional explosions elsewhere. They're trying to follow that, but it's a little bit hard to tell. Again, it is 2:30 in the morning in Kabul, and Nick Robertson continues to watch there. Now let's turn to Judy Woodruff for us in Washington. Judy.
Joey, we are in the studio in Washington, but of course riveted to these pictures coming out of Kabul, Afghanistan. With me in the studio watching former United States Defense Secretary William Cohen and Republican Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah. I want to ask both of you about what's going on. Let me begin with you, Secretary Cohen. Is this something that is likely to be the United States retaliating, which is what I think immediately comes to people's minds?
I think we have to be very cautious in coming to that judgment, Judy. What we're looking at now is the United States gathering information and intelligence. Obviously, there are many plans and contingency plans that we have to deal with responding to any potential terrorist threat that might be in the offing again. But I think it's very premature to make any judgment on this. This could be part of the civil war that's been raging on for some time, and so I think we have to wait to get more information.
What do you mean part of a civil war?
Well, there's been a civil war raging in Afghanistan for some time now, and this could be simply the factions still carrying on their fighting in Kabul, rather than any kind of an attack being launched by the United States.
Are you saying, Mr. Cohen, that it's unlikely that the United States would move this quickly? I'm asking that because just a few minutes ago I was interviewing former Secretary of State Lawrence Eagleburger, and he said flat out what the United States needs to do is strike against countries like Afghanistan that are harboring terrorists and not wait to find out exactly who was responsible for today's atrocities.
Well, I think we do have to isolate and ostracize those countries like Afghanistan and others who are on the terrorist list who give safe harbor for terrorists. But I think we have to be a little more judicious rather than simply striking out. We have to get more information, and further strikes might be warranted. But at this point, I think we get all the information, then make a very ice-cold decision in terms of what we need to do to protect the American people and make sure that this doesn't happen again. But I think that may be a bit premature at this point.
Senator Hatch, again, we're stressing we have no idea who's behind these attacks in Kabul, the government center of Afghanistan. But if this were the West, if this were the United States, would it be appropriate to retaliate so quickly?
Well, we have some information. You know, about a month ago we had information that they were planning on some big strikes, people who were affiliated or associated with bin Laden. Then just today we've intercepted some information where some people who are associated with bin Laden basically said that they had hit 2 targets. So it looks to me like there's increasing evidence, even though it's fragmentary and even though it's not positive, that bin Laden is behind all this. And of course, I first warned the nation in 1996 on Meet the Press that we better get hold of bin Laden or he's going to kill Americans.
We're going to bring back our Nick Robertson there on the ground in, or I should say on top of a building there in Kabul. Nick, you're on. Go.
Well, certainly the fire we were watching on the horizon before, I'd made the assumption that it was an oil depot burning because we'd certainly seen flames, a dull yellow fire turn into a bright orange fire with flames leaping into the sky. I've been informed by my associates here who work with us in Kabul that it's very likely an ammunition dump that we're looking at. They believe an ammunition dump is located in that area. That, of course, would account for some of the explosions that we've been hearing here as ammunition has detonated and gone off from that location, Judy. Certainly it's all quiet here in Kabul right now. Certainly no more explosions are being heard around the city. And we certainly believe what we're looking at now is an ammunition dump, the fire at that dump now dying down, and we're hearing no more detonations coming from that dump. Certainly Kabul is within striking range of some of the long-range missiles that the Northern Alliance has and is capable of launching in this direction. And certainly in the past, the Northern Alliance has launched missiles at Kabul. It is not without the realms of possibility that the Northern Alliance could launch missiles at this time. The Northern Alliance in the last couple of days has gone through the rather traumatic process of an assassination attempt on its key leader, Ahmed Shah Massoud. Still unconfirmed whether that leader is alive or dead, and certainly there's a ferocity within the internal fighting going on in Afghanistan at this time. One certainly cannot rule out that any missiles falling on the city tonight could be coming from that Northern Alliance.
So, Nick Robertson, just to clarify, you're saying it could well be part of an internal, civil war that we see here, and not a result of something coming from the West, NATO, the United States?
From our vantage point this evening, we can certainly report a large number of explosions around the city, what appears to be an ammunition dump on fire, a lot of return fire coming up from positions in Kabul. We cannot say from this position at this time exactly where the missiles are coming from, those causing the detonations in and around the city of Kabul. It is possible it's from the Northern Alliance, and of course there is the other possibility that we've been talking about this evening.
And Nick, is this typical of the kind of fire that you've been seeing back and forth in this war that's been going on in Afghanistan? Is this at all typical?
No, one would definitely have to say it's not typical. The strikes on Kabul have been very infrequent over the last few years, very occasional. The Northern Alliance very aware that it's been blamed in the past of many civilian casualties by launching attacks on Kabul. So there have been very few direct attacks on the city. And indeed, the forces of the Northern Alliance are at such a distance back from the city, only long-range, medium-range missiles capable of going 30, 40, 50 miles are able to reach the city from their positions. And it's certainly not something that's happened in this city, a barrage of this type, a sustained artillery attack or missile attack of this type in recent years even.
All right, Nick Robertson, we want you to stay connected to us. Let's keep this connection alive. But as we're watching these pictures, let's now go back to New York and to Aaron Brown. Aaron.
Judy, thank you. I'm joined here as well by Paula Zahn, and you will hear her voice in just a moment. As we continue to look at these pictures out of Afghanistan, again, I would remind you that the technology here is called a video phone. It is very high tech and a little bit imperfect, but it is perfect enough so that you can clearly see that fire burning in the distance. What Nick Robertson has described as an ammunition dump, very probably, and you can very clearly see, or we've been very able to see throughout Nick's reporting, the tracer fire coming up, the anti-aircraft fire coming up.
I think we need to make it clear at this point that no group has claimed responsibility for the multiple attacks today, and yet U.S. intelligence officials confirmed with David Enser earlier today that they believe a group connected to Osama bin Laden may have been involved. You have talked about this all day long, and I think you've done a very good job of explaining how well financed this would had to have been, how well orchestrated. It begs the question, if not Osama bin Laden, then who?
Then who? Nick, from the very beginning, the Taliban officials, Afghani officials have said we had nothing to do with this. Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with this. How do you hear that? Was there any nuance in the language that sent a different message that maybe the rest of us might not have heard? Well, perhaps we have lost at least the
Students whose family members and friends worked inside the World Trade Center. Ken Screven reports.
I started to cry when I seen the first building collapse, and I saw the second building collapse, and I just walked out the room, and I just, for me, I was trying to hold it in, but I couldn't.
17-year-old Jeremy Smith of Brooklyn is one of several students at Troy's Redemption Christian Academy whose family members work inside the towers of the World Trade Center. Officials at the private school brought older kids into a TV room this morning to watch the breaking news of the attack.
We were unaware of the fact that several of our boarding students, parents, aunts, uncles, brothers, relatives worked in the Trade Center. When they were describing the scene in which people were jumping out of the windows and they were overwhelmed. Some of them were hysterical and literally crying, screaming.
Which we've not yet heard. These developments here in Washington and New York, as you may well be able to imagine, making headlines. The Washington Post, which obviously had gone to press before these events happened this morning, has rushed out a special late edition of the paper. And I just thought I would show you. We had some on tape, but there's what that headline looks like. As you see, the headline, "Terror Hits Pentagon World Trade Center," with a big picture similar to the ones that we've been showing you all day long. Now, obviously, the implications of this, we're hearing now from Capitol Hill and reflected in the words of the president, the sense that the United States is not going to take this terrorist attack lying down, that those responsible will be hunted down, as the president said, that there will be some kind of retaliation. But it's a difficult question how to retaliate at a time like this. You're hearing members of Congress say this is an act of war. This is comparable to Pearl Harbor. Of course, the day after Pearl Harbor, the United States declared itself at war with Japan. But what kind of a declaration of war would someone make? What kind of an official act could Congress pass at a time like this? For some possible answers to that, let's bring in Ambassador Paul Bremer, who is a terrorism authority and formerly chair of a national commission on this subject. Mr. Ambassador, what about this? What does a nation do if it's trying to make a decisive response to events like this?
Well, first of all, it is an act of war. There's no question about that in my mind. And once we determine who did it or what group or what states were involved, I would hope that we will retaliate with the most vigorous and broad-ranging military response that we can come up with to make the point the president has made earlier today, that we simply can't tolerate this kind of action.
We don't have a long history in recent years, Mr. Ambassador, of being able to identify particularly well the sources of such terrorism. We've done it in some cases. We did it in the case of Libya and that discotheque bombing.
Well, actually, that's not right. In terms of the major attacks, we've been very good. We know who did the attack on the Marine barracks in 1983, the Libyan disco attack in Berlin, Pan Am 103, the World Trade Center bombing, the East African bombings, the Khobar Towers. In fact, the record is pretty good. The record is pretty good. We will find out who did this. I'm confident.
We will find this out to the kind of certainty where we would be able to target with precision the perpetrators, find them, and attack them?
I'm absolutely confident we will find out who did it, and then we will go after the perpetrators wherever they are, and I would hope that we would conclude that any state which was involved in any way, giving any kind of support or safe haven to that group, will pay the ultimate price.
Is it conceivable to you, sir, that these flashes in the sky that we're seeing in the night above the airport or in the airport area around Kabul, Afghanistan, represent some kind of an American air? You see, you can see some of that now on our screen, courtesy of CNN, blazes and flashes in the sky. Is it conceivable to you, sir, that this represents some kind of an American counterattack or response, or is it too soon to imagine that that would have occurred?
I think it's probably too early for that to be an American response. There's an awful lot of unrest in Afghanistan all the time. But the key here is not that. The key is not the retaliation. It's important. The key is to be able to prevent attacks on Americans so American citizens don't die. And that requires better intelligence than we have on terrorist groups. The National Commission on Terrorism, which I chaired, made some important recommendations on improving this intelligence, and I hope that those recommendations will now be acted on. They haven't been acted on in the last year.
Well, give me a sense then of what step one for you would be. You're standing next to the President of the United States for the sake of this discussion, and he says, "Sir, what's the first thing I should do?"
First thing you got to do is figure out who did it, and that involves going back through the intelligence that's been coming in over the last year and seeing if we missed anything. It means coordinating with the law enforcement as they begin to look into these hijackings to see where those trails lead, and they will lead somewhere. These people had to buy tickets and show identification. We will find out something. And then once you know where it is, you have to get a very broad-ranging retaliation, at which point I certainly hope that all these countries who are today expressing sympathy and support for us will still be with us, because we will know who our real friends are when the retaliation starts.
Now, let me ask you this question about the hijackings themselves. Obviously, there's some mystery. We thought in America that we had conquered this problem. We had airport security that was tight, and you couldn't get aboard an airplane with any kind of metal on you or anything that would be any kind of weapon. What would be your estimate as to how this hijacking was able to be executed?
It's hard to say, but it's obvious. In addition to an intelligence failure, we have a catastrophic airport security failure here with 4 hijackings in one day. I travel a lot, as many people do, and of course I've noticed that it's often the case that the people in charge in conducting these searches are not always as attentive as they should be. It's possible that these people got on board without real weapons and used fake weapons, weapons they could get through the X-ray machines. We just don't know at this point. But it's clear there is a catastrophic security failure, which is going to have to be gotten to the bottom of.
Would it be your guess, based upon the magnitude of the attack, the precision with which it was executed, that is there anybody you can think of beside Osama bin Laden who might have been behind it?
Yes, I think at this point there's a list. It's a short list of 3 or 4 possibilities. Bin Laden is certainly suspect number 1. It's also possible some of the groups in the Middle East, the more radical Palestinian groups, could possibly have conducted such an attack.
How likely would it?
Well, you can't say. At this point, you're just asking for who could do it, and they're capable. And Iraq would be the 3rd on the list. It's clear Saddam Hussein, or a state, Iraq and Iran, would be the 4th. Would have this kind of capability. I think it's unlikely that the Iranians are behind it, but I wouldn't at this point, if I were advising the president, I don't think one would exclude any of those suspects yet.
All right. Paul Bremer, very, very useful information and analysis. Thank you very much, sir. Let me turn now to Senator Bob Graham of Florida, a Democratic senator. Senator, there's been a lot of talk on Capitol Hill, and you just heard it reflected in the remarks of Mr. Bremer. That this was an act of war. Other members of the Senate have said as much today, sir. Would you concur in that assessment?
Absolutely. This is the most serious attack against the United States since Pearl Harbor, and I believe we should respond as aggressively as we did against the Japanese.
Well, if Congress were to meet tonight or tomorrow and pass something, what would it say?
Well, we're going to meet tomorrow, and we'll pass a resolution which will basically be a statement of sympathy to the victims, and as well as a commitment of the United States to assure that its honor and the justice to those victims is secured. But beyond that, there are some important things we need to do. I agree with Ambassador Brimmer as to the state of our intelligence and the fact that we need to make a serious investment in upgrading our human intelligence, the ability to get a human being inside one of these terrorist cells, to understand their motivations and intentions so that we can interdict before we have to deal with the rubble of a World Trade Center. We also need to make a greater investment in our technology, particularly our eavesdropping technology, which used to be the state of the art for the world, but which has degraded over recent years. And finally, we need to make an investment in the analysis of all the information that we collect. We collect a mountain of information, how to pick out those few nuggets within that mountain that make the difference in terms of understanding what a terrorist group's going to do.
Senator, let me just... In the wake of this unthinkable tragedy, sports has become insignificant. I'm Kevin Frazier in the Fox Network Center in Los Angeles. We at the National are here simply to quickly update you on cancellations and postponements across the country, and we'll return to Fox News' coverage momentarily. Of the major sports, baseball was the first to respond, postponing all 15 of Tuesday's games and also canceling the league's owners' meetings in Milwaukee that were scheduled for Tuesday and Wednesday. Commissioner Bud Selig spoke with Dave Van Dyke of FoxSports.com earlier Tuesday.
Bud, you've canceled games for today. Could this go on farther?
Well, David, I just don't know. I mean, obviously, I'm like everybody else in America right now. I'm in shock. Canceling the games today was something that I knew we would do early this morning out of respect for all the people involved in this absolutely horrific tragedy. And I don't have any further plans right now other than to just sit and monitor the situation. And,
how do you proceed with something like this? This is uncharted territory this morning is what's happened. Where do you go from here? How do you proceed? How do you make decisions on what to do?
Well, it is uncharted territory. You know, I said earlier this morning, as you heard, I thought in my lifetime when I saw the Kennedy assassination, which took me a long time to get over, that was the most horrible thing I'd ever see in my lifetime. And then the earthquake in '89 during the World Series, which was a terrible situation with a lot of tragedy. But this transcends all of these. This is really beyond comprehension. And I know that baseball as a social institution has played a very valuable role in the last 100 years during some tough times in this country, but this is something we're going to have to monitor, and I'll talk to a lot of people in a lot of places. And as you know, I think you know me pretty well, Dave, I generally move very cautiously and I hope very thoughtfully. But today my attention is just focused on all the heartbreaking tragedy.
With the familiar turbine whine of jet engines over New York City, but this Boeing 767 was too low and not in the regular flight pattern. It was aimed straight for the massive twin towers of the World Trade Center. CBS's Byron Pitts is on the scene tonight. Byron?
Dan, without exaggeration, this part of Manhattan looks like a battlefield. We have seen blood. We have seen body parts. We have watched people die in front of our eyes. This was terrorism, like we in America have never seen before. 8:48 a.m., mayhem in Manhattan.
We saw a plane coming very low, and everyone said, wow, that plane is very, very low.
Come on, guys, keep moving. I was walking to work, and all of a sudden, I see a jet crash into the first tower.
An American Airlines flight loaded with 92 people crashes head-on into the North Tower of the World Trade Center.
And then we heard the crash, we ran to the window.
Into the building, it went into the Trade Center.
We hit the Trade Center, we saw the shrapnel fall, and then we said, get out.
And minutes later.
Oh, there's another one. Another plane just hit. Right. Oh, my God. Another plane has just hit.
I heard a roar, and I looked around thinking that it had to be a helicopter, and I looked up and I saw the second plane hit.
A second commercial plane, a United Airlines jet, also hijacked, carrying 65 people, plows into the South Tower.
First one we thought was an accident. When we heard there was a second one, we definitely thought it was terrorism.
On the ground, witnesses could not believe their eyes. 70 stories up with the building burning. Reason gave way to desperation. New York's bravest never had a chance.
We really never even got to that close to the building. An explosion blew and it knocked everybody over.
Less than an hour later, the South Tower came crumbling down.
It collapsed. The top floors collapsed down. I saw it blow and then ran like hell. Thank God. I'm 69, but I can still run.
But it was far from over.
Tower 2 collapsed into Tower 1. Within minutes after that, we were ordered out.
When the dust settled, signs of life started to emerge.
Chaos. It's just chaos out here. It really is. So the Twin Towers fall. It's amazing. It's crazy. I can't believe this shit is happening. I really can't. It's nightmares. Armageddon right here.
This was the worst act of terrorism on U.S. soil, but not the first attack on the World Trade Center. 8 years ago, terrorists set off bombs in the basement in an effort to take down the two towers. They failed. Today, mission accomplished.
I tell you what, it's a sad day for America, it really is.
By 2 o'clock this afternoon, firefighters and police officers and paramedics by the hundreds stood by, many of them feeling helpless. There was nothing they could do at this point because the building was still unsecured.
Our main priority is to get in, do a search and rescue, look for survivors, and then clean up what's left. And we can't do that until the building is deemed safe.
Ankle deep in debris and despair, rescue workers waited. Some had relatives of their own inside. One police officer told me her sister worked here on the 40th floor, due in at 9 a.m. She was always early, she said. Always. A sign on a paramedic's van spoke volumes.
We're going to do the best that we can to get people out there, get into the hospital, get back in line, go back out there and do it again.
New York Port Authority Police Chief William Hall choked back tears. For him, this was no longer just work. On a personal level, because I know that these are all your men and it's a business, but I'm sure that a lot of these guys are your friends. How you
It's
holding
not a
up?
business now, it's personal now.
Sir?
It's personal now. We have to get them.
Back live, we have had little relief here. Take a look at this. About an hour ago, World Trade Center building number 7 collapsed. A 42-story building, weakened by the devastation that had occurred earlier today. No word of any casualties in the building. It was the one calamity that was not a surprise. Police had evacuated the area hours ago. Fearful building number 7 would indeed fall down. This morning when the first tower collapsed, I was standing about 3 blocks away with CBS News correspondent Mika Brzezinski. As a fireball rolled toward us, Mika grabbed her shoes, I grabbed her hand, and we ran like hell. Thousands did. Dan, except for a few sirens, I have never heard New York City this quiet. Graveyard quiet. Dan?
Byron Pitts in Lower Manhattan. When the first World Trade Center building was hit, rescue workers rushed to it. We're now told that some of those rescue workers died as the second World Trade Center building was hit and eventually the 2 buildings collapsed. Now about today's other terror strike at the seat and symbol of U.S. military power, the U.S. Defense Department, the Pentagon. There were 64 people aboard American Flight 77, the jetliner hijackers used to ram into the Pentagon. CBS News' David Martin reports the deadly impact there. David?
Dan, as you can see behind me, the Pentagon is still smoldering from that direct hit it suffered this morning, but it's finally cooled down enough so that rescue workers can begin the task of recovering the dead and wounded. One early count put the number of dead at 20, but no one expects it to stop there. The first attack ever on the Pentagon occurred at 9:38 a.m. Eastern Time.
Clip this ball over here, hit another ball and slammed right into the building. Huge explosion, and then utter pandemonium, as you might imagine. I mean, everybody was screaming, "Oh my God."
A hijacked American Airlines jet, which had just taken off from Dulles Airport, flew right up the main highway leading north into Washington and straight into the citadel of American military power.
There was no doubt about it. It was American Airlines slammed right into the building, and there was no doubt about it. Whoever was piloting that plane was aiming for the Pentagon.
Fearful that, like the World Trade Center, a second airliner was on its way, most of the building's 23,000 workers fled.
Plane's coming in. Come on. Let's go. Let's go. We're not playing around here. Let's go.
F-16 fighters circled overhead looking for a second attack, but the damage had already been done. The plane had drilled a hole about a third of the way through the world's largest office building. The wounded were rushed to nearby hospitals as the fire spread and an entire section of the building collapsed, trapping many, many more inside.
Arlington search and rescue personnel are just now, and it's about almost 2 o'clock, just now gaining access to portions of the building where the plane hit because the fires were too intense.
One ray of hope. The Pentagon is undergoing a major renovation, and some of the offices in the path of the plane were vacant.
We're trying to find out who made it out okay and account for the people that may not have made it out.
When the plane hit, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld dashed from his office on the other side of the building.
And proceeded down towards the impact point in the building. It actually went outside the building and was helpful in getting several people that were injured onto stretchers, and then came back into the building and was in the National Military Command Center.
With smoke hanging in the air of the command center, Rumsfeld ordered aircraft carriers, amphibious ships, cruisers, and destroyers to New York and Washington, where they can serve as floating hospitals, help with the cleanup, and provide air defense against the possibility of more attacks. Rescue efforts are a long way from over, but the FBI is already combing the debris for clues to who was behind this. The Pentagon has put all its bases on the highest state of alert, and the State Department has done the same thing with American embassies around the world. The early suspicion is that Osama bin Laden was behind this, and U.S. officials say eventually there will be military retaliation. Dan?
David Martin reporting live from the Pentagon. President Bush is just reported to have landed at Andrews Air Force Base just outside of Washington. He is said to be going to the White House itself. From there, he will address the American people tonight. We will see and hear it, of course, live on CBS News. As regards the explosions in Kabul, Afghanistan, a senior Pentagon official now says, and I quote him, "That is not a U.S. strike." Repeat, not a U.S. strike. This despite reports from the scene by at least one reporter on the scene who said that it was a missile strike. A senior Pentagon official says that it's simply not true. It wasn't a U.S. strike. Now, to punish those behind today's attacks, the United States and its people must first determine who they are. We are a country that believes in facts and the pursuit of facts. The facts are few about who's responsible for this. There has been much speculation, italicize, underscore the word speculation about that today, with Osama bin Laden, the renegade Saudi millionaire, frequently mentioned. No one knows who did this. CBS's Jim Stewart in Washington is following the investigation, checking his sources, and has this live report. Jim.
Dan, apparently we have a little bit more now than just speculation. U.S. intelligence officials and law enforcement no longer have just a theory about today's unprecedented attack. They now have some evidence, and it all points to Osama bin Laden. Sources tell CBS News that hours after the attack, intelligence agents detected what one official is calling significant indicators that the suicide planes were hijacked by members of Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group that reports to bin Laden. Sources describe the intelligence as communications intercepts, but would not provide any details. It's not definitive, said one official, but it is persuasive.
Sensing that bin Laden would quickly become a suspect, Afghanistan's ruling Taliban party, which has been giving him safe refuge, called a press conference. We do not allow Osama bin Laden to operate from our land, the Taliban said, warning the U.S. not to take any, quote, speedy actions to retaliate. Meanwhile, law enforcement sources said there had been no credible claims for the joint attacks and that intelligence had picked up no specific threats aimed at targets inside the United States before the attacks took place. Within minutes of today's attacks, officials were pointing to the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center by a group with ties to bin Laden, citing it as proof that bin Laden has never given up on his dream to destroy the symbol of America's economic power. And in recent months, analysts say bin Laden has only become more and more sophisticated in his attempts to strike at the United States. They point specifically to his simultaneous attack on 2 U.S. embassies in East Africa.
They also went directly against a U.S. destroyer, which was heavily guarded, and they did put a hole in that ship, the USS Cole. So they have a track record of conducting attacks that one would think they might not be capable of.
Late today, the U.S. intelligence community was rapidly sorting through a priority list of potential suspects within the U.S. for electronic eavesdropping, with sources saying the number may reach into the hundreds.
There is also specific physical evidence that investigators are eager to examine. First are the transcripts of communications between the suicide aircraft and ground controllers, and second are cockpit tape recordings of conversations in the doomed aircraft themselves. The working theory is that the hijackers were pilots themselves and forcefully took over the controls to dive the jets straight into their targets. Dan?
Jim Stewart, good work with getting that new information about increasing evidence, real hard evidence, nothing conclusive yet, that bin Laden is tied to this. But do U.S. intelligence officials know where bin Laden is? Still in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Baluchistan? Do they have any idea?
As recently as the beginning of the week, they had reason to believe that he was hanging out in the two locations that he has most frequently been at in Afghanistan, and that's the cities of Jalalabad and Kandahar. Now, he travels frequently, Dan, and he does so by SUV and caravans with sometimes as many as 100 guards. It's a safe bet that he is on the move again tonight.
United States Secretary of Defense, thank you, Jim Stewart. U.S. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld has begun a briefing at the Pentagon. We pick it up in progress live.
Ladies and gentlemen, as the Secretary just said, today we have watched the tragedy of an outrageous act of barbaric terrorism carried out by fanatics against both civilians and military people. Acts that have killed and maimed many innocent and decent citizens of our country. I extend my condolences to the entire Department of Defense families, military and civilian, and to the families of all those throughout our nation who lost loved ones. I think this is indeed a reminder of the tragedy and the tragic dangers that we face day in and day out, both here at home as well as abroad. I would tell you up front, I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Carl Levin.
Our intense focus on recovery and helping the injured and the families of those who were killed is matched only by our determination to prevent more attacks and matched only by our unity to track down, root out, and relentlessly pursue terrorists, states that support them, and harbor them. They are connected
to those explosions.
What about Osama bin Laden? Do you suspect him as the prime suspect in this?
It's not the time for discussions like that.
A show of bipartisan support and solidarity at the Pentagon with Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld orchestrating this bipartisan appearance by members of Congress and General Hugh Shelton, the chairman of the Military Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington.
But it was Senator John Warner, one of the most senior politicians involved with the military for many, many years now, and a man with a real sense of history and knowledge of history, surely, who describes this as the most tragic hour in America's history. I think there will be people, not least of whom are historians throughout the country, will argue with the senator about that today, given the attack on Pearl Harbor, given the invasion of Normandy, and heavens knows, given the first and most tragic days of the Civil War in 1861, who will argue with that characterization. But it does give you some real sense at the moment of how intense the feeling is, not only in the political establishment, in the country as a whole as well, and all sorts of other countries. I'm getting messages from countries all day today, people deeply, profoundly shaken by the experience that the United States has had today. I want to go to Washington now because Claire Shipman is there right opposite the White House. We'll come back to Charlie Gibson and casualties in just a moment, but as we think, Claire, that the president may indeed be arriving, are those helicopters, Air Force or Marine One as it's called, the President's helicopter coming from Andrews Air Force Base?
Yes, that's right, Peter. And in fact, we're told the only reason that his security team felt comfortable letting him chopper back to the White House was because there is substantial air cover in the area keeping him protected. But it has been a long day for him, as you noted, and he has, we're told from people who were with him, wanted to get back to the White House all day, but again was listening very closely to his security team, who wanted to be absolutely certain that that was going to be all right. We were talking earlier, the president is very eager to make plain tonight that his mood is retaliatory, to express impatience. We got a little bit of a hint of that from a statement from Ari Fleischer, his press secretary today, who said not so long ago, we will find these people and they will suffer the consequences of taking on this nation. I wouldn't be surprised to hear something like that from the president tonight. Equally eager to get back, Peter, just as the president is back, congressional leaders, they're planning to make a public statement tonight at 7:30 p.m. Again, everybody wanting to show this is business as usual in Washington, certainly not usual in the way we would ever define it, but they want to show a government that is up and functioning because they think that the PR element here, in terms of sending a message around the world, is every bit as important as security measures.
As we wait, I'm going to bring in the voice of Charlie Gibson at the moment, because I do not want to go away from this scene on what I assume is the south lawn of the White House. We'll just stay with this and watch the president come out. But Charlie, you've been trying to get some kind of handle on casualties throughout the day. Have had any success?
Well, no, Peter. People want a number, and as if it were some way to quantify these most horrific of acts, and properly no one has been willing to speculate on what that number may be. Obviously, any low number would have to be ratcheted up at some point, and to give upper-end estimates are probably too horrible to imagine. As the mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani, said, when we get the final number, it will be more than we can bear. The concern, obviously, is that there were emergency workers inside the World Trade Centers when they collapsed, when the Twin Towers came down, and the evacuations had not been completed. And as the Secretary of Defense said a moment ago, when we get the totals from the Pentagon, it will be a lot more than a few. We do have some estimates on injured, but again, these are highly unreliable. The mayor, again, saying at least 2,100 injured in New York, 1,500 taken to Liberty State Park across the Hudson River in New Jersey, 600 taken to hospitals, and the most chilling, one of the most chilling quotes that we've heard today, St. Vincent's Hospital here in New York had more than 200 injured. One doctor, Stephen Stern, saying there are hundreds of people burned head to toe, and we know many burn victims have been evacuated, some as far away as being taken to Canada, some being flown to Vanderbilt Hospital.
Then moved on to Louisiana and then out to Nebraska, where he went into a bunker totally reminiscent of the situation which the president might have found himself in which the country's new and young president could ever have imagined was going to occur on his watch, which would test his leadership qualities so. And he is going, and how he responds, how he accommodates the country's frustration, and how he accommodates a country's anxiety and anger, and how he responds or finds a way to respond, and as we've said many times, to whom will mark George Bush, however it goes, one way or the other. As he will speak to the nation at 9 o'clock tonight, and as Claire Shipman said to us, the representatives of the Congress, who've been pretty forthright today, earlier Senator Biden early today, saying that Congress must be seen to keep going.
This is John McLaughlin back in the News 10 studios, where we continue to report on the local impact, the local ramifications of those hellish events in both New York City and Washington today. One of the developments that we are reporting right now, word that all classes at UAlbany, the University at Albany, have been canceled for tomorrow. There will be no classes at the University of Albany tomorrow. Also, for the past several hours, of course, the word has gone out from both New York City and Washington of the great need for blood donations, especially type O blood. Right now, Tracy Egan joins us live from the Red Cross on Everett Road in the town of Colony, where I would assume that there was a great response being mobilized right now to that, Tracy.
Well, it was really incredible, the response from the community. When I came here in mid-afternoon, there were probably 400 people standing outside the building, lining up to roll up their sleeves. They wanted to help. In fact, the Northeast Regional Red Cross was able to send 1,000 units of blood down to New York City based on supplies they already had. So people coming in now will be supplementing those supplies, and of course the blood is only good for 42 days. But they were opening till 10 tonight, but they knew that they couldn't handle 400 people between 4 this afternoon and 10 tonight. So around 5 o'clock, they told people, go home, come back tomorrow or the next day. They're going to try to spread out their visits. We spoke to Steve Thomas. He is the district manager for Eastern New York Blood Services.
Escalators, which were clear, was a very welcome sign for all of us trying to get off. They were clear of smoke and debris, so we used them obviously to walk down to the lowest point, which was the mezzanine level.
So you could still see at this point?
We could see, we could breathe perfectly.
At some
But
point?
you're still in danger at this
Yes.
point if the buildings are going to collapse.
Well, we didn't know what was going on, but we certainly know we were in immediate danger.
And so you tried to get away from the base of the building as far as you could?
Yes. And we exited through the Marriott Hotel with police personnel, of course. And they were just screaming to get away from the building as quickly as possible and cover our heads, which we tried to do with whatever we had in our hands.
Tell me about your efforts to contact Rosemary, your wife, your family members. Obviously, just tremendous concern for your well-being.
Yes, my manager and myself, who got at that point separated from our other staff members, we're hoping that everybody was okay.
But you don't know that yet?
No. Fortunately, my manager was left a voicemail at home that all our immediate group is okay.
Good.
We haven't, or at least several hours ago, we had not heard of our secretary. So I'd love to know that she's okay.
Finally,
To go through this twice, I mean, obviously this one was 10 times more devastating. Can't even put a number on it, but you were there in '93, and then here you go again. What were the thoughts going through your mind?
Heidi, my thoughts were similar to what happened in '93, was that something immediately and devastatingly horrific has occurred, and which way is out? Basically, how do we safely evacuate the environment that we're in and help? The one thing I do want to mention was our group and everyone on the 21st floor looked for everyone before we left to make sure everybody was off the floor. And when we did that, as far as we could tell, we were screaming our lungs out. As far as we could tell, we got all personnel off the floor that we could tell.
You can speak for many of the tens of thousands of people who worked in that building who, as you look at the television pictures of Lower Manhattan now, the building where you worked is gone. The building where tens of thousands of people worked is gone. How do you see yourself dealing with this professionally, emotionally, in every way in the days and weeks ahead?
Well, I think we're all concerned about people that we work with that we don't know if they're okay, given what we're watching on the video here and that we were watching live earlier today. So that would be our first concern, is to know that everyone is home and safe at this point. Beyond that, I can't really say what's going to happen. I can't think of what's going to happen, but I think time will tell as the days go on. But our immediate concern is that everyone got out okay.
John, we're so happy that you're okay, and I'm looking at your wife right now. She's standing off camera, Rosemary Gomez, and I know she's got a smile on her face.
Yeah, great.
Thank God.
John, thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Best of luck.
Thank you.
Over 300 working on the upper floors, and they've had no word of them. And this is why he came to St. Vincent's, to see if any of them had survived this disaster, Shepard.
Catherine Harrods live with us from the hospital. We will keep watch there. The numbers at an initial look might sound good, that there are just a few hundred people who have been taken to area hospitals, a few hundred people that have been reported to us. There are different ways to read that, of course. The video at which you were just looking was the collapse of the third building there. They call it Building 7 at World Financial Center, a 42-story structure. Certainly a building that would have would have towered above most skylines across America. It was dwarfed, of course, in the shadow of the World Trade Center, but it collapsed just about an hour and a half or so ago, I believe. That was expected. There had been a lot of shaking on Lower Manhattan. They knew that it would come down. The question was when, and now it has. As many as 50,000 people working in that building. Thousands of tourists on a given day would visit as well. And putting numbers together is something that simply cannot yet be done. Seeing those pictures, knowing that, imagine, if you will, the number of people in the city of New York who knew people who went down with TWA Flight 800. Everyone seemed to know someone. Rest assured, everyone does know someone who was inside the World Trade Center this morning.
This was the view across the upper New York Bay past the Statue of Liberty at about 10:30 in the morning. And this afternoon, just before 5:30, a 47-story building in the Trade Center complex collapsed.
There was speculation but no definite word about who was behind those attacks. Most of the speculation centered on the Middle East. Again to Kwame Holman.
10:56 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat spoke in Gaza.
First of all, I am offering my condolences, the condolences of the Palestinian people to the American President, President Bush, to his government, to the American people for this terrible act. We are completely shocked, unbelievable.
In the West Bank, a spokesman for the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or DFLP, a radical PLO faction, denied his group was involved in the attacks.
The DFLP has no relation to this accident or this incident. We have always been against terroristic actions, against civilian targets, and especially outside the occupied territories. But in spite of that, we deny our responsibility, but we call upon the American administration to review their attitude and their policy towards the Palestinian question, because this policy arouses the anger and the hatred of our people and of all Arab and Islamic peoples, and it's liable actually to harm the interests of the United States in our region, and therefore it has to be reviewed.
The spiritual leader of Hamas, the pro-Palestinian Islamic resistance movement, said this.
First of all, we don't support attacks on civilians, and we don't support aggression towards innocent people. However, the United States should revise its current stance and has to look again at its position very carefully towards people all over the world. If the U.S. doesn't want to be targeted and suffer the same way as other people are through oppression, injustice, and exploitation. In that regard, America finds itself today weakened in the face of the rest of humanity taking its own revenge against American oppression and injustice.
And in Pakistan, an ambassador of Afghanistan's ruling Taliban also denounced the attacks.
I strongly condemn these incidents. I want an investigation to be carried out, and who has committed this should be brought to justice. We do not allow Osama bin Laden to operate from our land for such activities. We have taken all communications from him, and he is not in contact with anybody. He has no facilities to carry out such activity. The powerful rivals of America can carry out such activities, but not Osama.
At Jerusalem's Damascus Gate, some Palestinian men, women, and children took to the streets in celebration after hearing of the events in the United States. In Lebanon, at a Palestinian refugee camp, there were more celebrations as men fired their weapons in the air.
President Bush vowed to find and punish the people behind the attacks. Here is what he said, and in a separate statement, the reaction of Secretary of State Colin Powell.
Just before noon, Secretary of State Colin Powell spoke from Lima, Peru, where he cut short his first official visit to South America. Before leaving, he thanked foreign ministers for adopting a message condemning terrorism.
A terrible, terrible tragedy has befallen my nation, but it has befallen all the nations of this region, all the nations of the world, and befallen all those who believe in democracy. Once again, we see terrorism, we see terrorists, people who don't believe in democracy, people who believe that with the destruction of buildings, with the murder of people, they can somehow achieve a political purpose. They can destroy buildings, they can kill people, and we will be saddened by this tragedy, but they will never be allowed to kill the spirit of democracy. They cannot destroy our society. They cannot destroy our belief in the democratic way. You can be sure that America will deal with this tragedy in a way that brings those responsible to justice. You can be sure that as terrible a day as this is for us, we will get through it because we are a strong nation, a nation that believes in itself.
A short time later, President Bush spoke to reporters at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. He'd flown there following his education event in Florida.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
The president then flew to the headquarters of the Strategic Air Command in Nebraska.
It's an indication that the United States government is functioning in the face of this terrible act against our country. I should add that the briefing here is taking place in the Pentagon. The Pentagon's functioning. It'll be in business tomorrow. I know the interest in casualty figures, and all I can say is it's not possible to have solid casualty figures at this time, and the various components are doing roster checks, and we'll have information at some point in the future, and as quickly as it's possible to have it, it will certainly be made available to each of you. I'll be happy to take a few questions after asking First General Shelton if he would like to say anything, and then we will allow the others to make a remark or two.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, as the Secretary just said, today we have watched the tragedy of an outrageous act of barbaric terrorism carried out by fanatics against both civilians and military people, acts that have killed and maimed many innocent and decent citizens of our country. I extend my condolences to the entire Department of Defense families, military and civilian, and to the families of all those throughout our nation who lost loved ones. I think this is indeed a reminder of the tragedy and the tragic dangers that we face day in and day out, both here at home as well as abroad. I would tell you up front, I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready.
Now more on who might have been behind this tragedy today.
It is now our mission to begin the healing from this tragedy. From the moment that we learned of these attacks, the Department of Health and Human Services has begun readying teams and resources to be sent to New York City and the Washington area to meet any needs of state and local officials. So far, we have sent 4 disaster medical teams to New York City and 3 of these disaster medical teams to the Washington, Northern Virginia, Baltimore area. These medical teams each consist of about 35 physicians, nurses, and emergency medical technicians. They are all trained to deal with traumatic injuries and other emergency needs. We've also sent 4 disaster mortuary operational response teams to New York and 3 to the greater Washington area. We're also in the process of shipping a great deal of emergency medical supplies to New York City with the help of the Centers for Disease Control. In short, we're making the full force of the Department of Health and Human Services, both its resources and medical expertise available to the areas that need our assistance. We've also this afternoon activated the United States Public Health Service Commission Corps, which consists of approximately 6,000 health professionals. We also are giving backup assistance to the 500-bed ship Comfort from the United States Navy. Americans all over are calling up and asking what they can do. The best thing they can do is respond to this great call by volunteering to give blood. We need Americans to continue to answer that call. No matter where you live, please do your civic duty and assist us by donating blood. It is our primary job is to make sure Americans harmed by this tragedy get the help that they need. We will remain in constant contact with the governors, the mayors, public health officials, and other local officials to make sure that all their needs are being met. It is a sad day, but America and all of its citizens certainly share tonight in the grief that it's been caused. And as the President and everybody in his administration have said, we, the government, will continue to operate and continue to provide the services to all Americans.
One of the most cherished freedoms is the freedom of movement, the ability to move freely and safely. But today that freedom was attacked. But we will restore that freedom throughout the national transportation system as soon as possible.
We're looking at a picture also on Capitol Hill where the Senate and House leadership is preparing to speak, flanked by hundreds of members of the U.S. Congress. Here's the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert.
The hearts and souls and feelings of the victims and the families that were a part of this great tragedy that happened in this country today. Our prayers and thoughts and words of consolation goes out to all those who have suffered. But one thing that happens here in this place is when American suffers, and when people perpetrate acts against this country, we as a Congress and as a government stand united, and we stand together. Senators and House members, Democrats and Republicans will stand shoulder to shoulder to fight this evil that's been perpetrated on this nation. We will stand together to make sure that those who have brought forth this evil deed will pay the price. We're not sure who this is yet. But we have our suspicions. And when that is justified and when those suspicions are justified, we will act. We will stand with the President, we will stand with this government, and we will stand as Americans together through this time. Thank you.
Today's despicable acts were an assault on our people and on our freedom. As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened by these horrific and cowardly acts. Congress will convene tomorrow. And we will speak with one voice to condemn these attacks, to comfort the victims and their families, to commit our full support to the effort to bring those responsible to justice. We, Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, stand strongly united behind the President and will work together to ensure that the full resources of the government are brought to bear in these efforts. Our heartfelt thoughts and our fervent prayers are with the injured and the families of those who have been lost.
We know as a nation, as we said, our thoughts and prayers are with those families and those injured and those who are the casualties of today's attack. We also remember those thousands of people who are rescue workers. We ask now that we all bow our heads in a moment of silence and remembrance. Thank you. A pointed display of bipartisan unity at this critical moment in U.S. history.
seemed like a spontaneous singing of God Bless America by scores of members of the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, seriously trying to send a message of unity during this difficult moment. Let's go back to Paula Zahn in New York, where she's got more details on this tragic day in Manhattan. Paula?
Thanks so much, Wolf. I think all day long you have seen the images replayed of exactly what happened here in New York City. The city, a victim of multiple attacks by hijacked commercial airlines. Joining me right now is Matt Cornelius, who is in the unfortunate position of being mid-level in Tower 1, the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Matt, thanks for joining us tonight. What happened? Where were you?
Well, I just arrived at work, probably about 8:40 a.m. I put my lunch away, and I was getting ready to start the day when all of a sudden we heard this tremendous crash. It was a really loud sound, followed by a sharp jolt in the building, and then the floor kind of seemed to wave.
We are looking at this incredibly dramatic shot of the impact of the American Airlines hitting the North Tower. You were not aware at all of what could have caused it.
We had no idea. Obviously, we knew something had struck the building. Somebody screamed out, "An airplane's hit the building," but I think that was just a guess. And when I thought about that, I thought probably a private plane, because you often see them flying around the World Trade Center. No one could have ever thought that it was a commercial jet plane of that size.
And your immediate instinct, I suppose, was to get out of the building.
Yeah.
Describe the evacuation.
Well, it wasn't, because people hadn't really arrived at work yet, it wasn't very organized. We basically decided...
Now that actually represents the second attack that happened 18 minutes after your building was struck.
Right. So when we got struck, everyone basically started